So, Bill Groom, you are back in the Emmy race this year for your work on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
I am. I'm amazed.
Take us back to the beginning. What about this project? Well, I guess it's a kind of an obvious question. You get to recreate the 1950s of New York City.
That's fun.
So I wonder, I mean, where did you start in your research for that?
Well, you start with the script and you start looking at all the elements that are there. And, we have all of our sources that vary from magazines and books about the period to product brochures, all kinds of things of the period. We use sources like the Library of Congress and that sort of thing. So anything in the beginning, of course, we started with the pilot episode. We've now done, I believe we're on our 16th episode. We're shooting the second season right now. We have 2.5 more episodes to complete before we're finished with the second season. And the show's been renewed for a third season, so we'll keep at this next year. But every time we get a script, there's anything, whether it's a New York bar or an apartment or any of the sets that the garment district is in the show, any of those things that appear in the script, we then research with all of our various sources. And we're always in the market of buying books, and both current and antique books. And we keep a library here, and we have all of our internet connections to the various places with information. And usually we're looking for pictures more than anything. And that's how we do that. I've said to a couple of other interviewers, I'm one of the few people, maybe one of the 2 people on the show who actually have a memory of 1958 and 59. I was very young, but I do remember that period. And so there's a certain amount of personal reference that then we follow up on with research and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
We'll talk a bit more.
I enjoy the research process a lot. We'll
talk a bit more about that, about how your personal memories of the period informed your work on it. What did you draw upon from your own life, even though you were a very young child?
I was born in 1950. So in 1958, which was last season, I was 8 years old. Some of it's just language. That's occasionally I'll see a word in a script that doesn't seem like 50s to me, and I will sort of follow up on that, and I feel I'll mention that to the writers or that sort of thing. Things that I like, paper cups and things that I handled as a kid that I remember, and that doesn't amount to much of the research for the show, but occasionally my memory of something will spark some research that then leads to something, some photos or something that's interesting that we follow up on. Also, when I was a kid, my grandfather was he was a minister, but he made his living building houses. So I'm a little bit familiar with construction techniques and the types of doors and windows that were being used at that time and all of that sort of stuff. So I'm just trying to put a positive spin on, I'm turning 68 day after tomorrow. So I'm just putting a positive spin on turning 68. So,
well, happy early birthday to you.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're welcome. One of the interesting things that this show does is, there's this real contrast between the world that Midge Maisel, played by Rachel Brosnahan, comes from, this kind of, very upper class, Manhattan lifestyle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the world that she goes to in this dingy nightclub.
The downtown look. So it's the uptown and the downtown. Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about how you differentiated those two, and helped show the kind of world that she was coming from and the world that she goes to and kind of discovers herself in?
Yeah, we sort of, for the pilot, we split it really into 3 looks. the uptown look, and she lives on the Upper West Side in the story. The kind of business district, which is where her husband Joel was working, and then the downtown look where she's performing and that sort of thing. So, and again, it comes from photographs, and you can see the difference between those different areas just in terms of the way things look. It's interesting that the downtown look, we found a lot of pictures that, except for the cars and a few bits of technology and that sort of thing, could be today. It seems like downtown has changed less than the rest of the neighborhoods. But yeah, that's been a sort of fun part of the show, is defining those three areas that that Midge lives in. And I've actually had a couple of crew members and others say that, they have parents who remember that time in the 50s on the Upper West Side and are very kind of touched by the show because they have memories that it kind of takes them back. So it feels good to get it right for them and to get that kind of feedback. And we're trying also to do the sort of layers that existed in New York, which is a little different than other parts of the country. Like LA, for instance, was very kind of new in the 1950s. New York was pretty much as layered then as it is now. And so we try not to just do things that are locked in a look that's locked in 1958, 1959, but also the various layers of New York. Midge and her family live in a building that was built in, I believe, 1909. That was the building we based it on. So people were living in that building in the 50s. They're still living in that building today. And so those layers are very important, I think, for the show.
Right. I mean, in the case of, say, her family's apartment, her parents' apartment, they would have things from, the 30s, 40s, 50s and onwards, kind of littered throughout their house.
Sure. I mean, and we kept that in mind. Midge's apartment was much more of that moment of 58, which is when the pilot takes place, because it's newly furnished for her and Joel. And but then we kept in mind when the parents probably bought the apartment, how long they've been living there. Midge was a little girl there. So the time period for the furniture and that sort of thing, we try to keep all of that in mind and be true to that.
The color scheme is really distinct in all these different areas too. Can you talk a bit about that? We just tried to be true to that period. And we decided early on that Midge liked pink as a color, and we used a lot of pink. And pink was very, very popular at that time. In fact, it was often in the day referred to as Mamie Eisenhower pink, because the First Lady in that period loved pink, and it made its way into everybody's home. So we basically have just based the color palette on the color palette of the period. And we've got some paint charts up on the wall, some that are, both exterior and interior colors. But some of the paint charts will have 36 colors. I mean, today, a company like Benjamin Moore has thousands of colors, but it was a little more limited at the time. So that makes it a little easier for us to keep it edited. And I work from those period paint charts very much. So, and the same thing's true of the wardrobe. And we find, I've been asked how we coordinate, but the truth is we're both responding to the same time period and working with the same colors from that time period. And that's, it's working. So, yeah. I mean, very often we don't necessarily talk. I mean, we did more on to get the pilot going and to sort of get a look for the show, that we both agreed that both the wardrobe and
our department agreed on and moved forward on that. But since then, we're just kind of in a rhythm of what the show looks like, and are using kind of the same color palette, but also being aware of how that palette changed from the late 50s into the early 60s. And we're looking forward to that. So.
Well, as you mentioned, I mean, you are working on the second season right now. Can you give us any kind of indication of what we might be able to expect?
I'm not allowed to do that.
Okay. I had to try.
Yeah. I've taken a couple of people on interviewers on a tour of the stage, and I wasn't allowed to show them the new sets for this season, only the sets from last year. So,
working with the Palladinos, Amy Sherman, who created the show, and Daniel. Can you talk a bit about how they helped, Amy Sherman in particular, who was, the guiding creative force behind the show, what she did and to really help you do your work?
Well, I mean, that's the reason I'm sort of doing the show is the script. I had a couple of scripts at the time, a couple of pilot scripts, and this was just the one that jumped out at me as being such great writing. And they, week after week after week, they just produce great scripts for us, and it's always a pleasure to read their scripts and then go to the table reads with the actors and listen to the script. The actors reading the scripts as they first come out, so that's always a pleasure. And in terms of coordinating between the photography and the sets for us and the wardrobe, I've said that a couple of times, that basically it's kind of on the page. I mean, Amy's not writing a pink room, but it's we're all kind of responding to the script, to the same script, and their style is very kind of particular and clear, and it's a pleasure to work with them, just as directors and producers. So that's been a great part of doing this. And I met them, they're my neighbors here in Brooklyn. I met them, it was a 20-minute walk to meet them. I talked to them, we hit it off, and we work 15 minutes from the house. So we're all very, there are a lot of people who work on the show who are based in Brooklyn, and so it's great.
Very convenient. Now, you are a 4-time Emmy winner for your work on Boardwalk Empire. What does that recognition mean for you?
My agent sort of, intercedes with all the requests and so on and so forth. She tells me that there's a lot of interest in me, but she also tells them I'm not available. So my first television since my Saturday Night Live days, which was a long time ago, was Boardwalk Empire. After that, I went on to vinyl, and then to this. I mean, I did do the When We Rise that you and I spoke about. Was it 2 or 3 years ago, I guess. So I haven't done that much television, but I've really enjoyed it. I've been lucky enough to work on sort of some high-profile projects, and for HBO and now Amazon. Amazon's great to work with, so that's been a pleasure. Television can be very, very hard because the pace is fast. The money in general is not quite like it is for the features, but this new kind of golden age of television has changed things a bit, and pretty much everybody's into it now, and it's great. I'm enjoying it a lot.
Well, Bill Groom, thank you so much, and it was a pleasure talking with you again.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you.